The issue is that it's not a race. And I think one of the challenges in the Indian system, for example, is that it is very kind of like hierarchical and score based. You're not going to win most times by being the best. Admissions officers are usually very highly trained, highly educated people. They see what you're doing. And so, what I advocate to my Indian students.
In your experience, how different are Indian students from students or profiles that you see across the board? Do you see them being similar or being clonish of each other, or do you see a lot of diversity? Or do you see very academic, strong academic focus? How do you define
Mhm.
their profiles?
It's funny because every time I speak with somebody who's an education expert around the world, and they always feel like, okay, like our students are completely different and categorized like this. And the reality is that in the broader pool, there are many students that look alike. And here's the problem: when you're dealing with highly selective admissions, when your admit rates are, 4, 3, 4, 5%, right? The issue is that it's not a race. And I think one of the challenges in the Indian system, for example, is that it is very kind of like hierarchical and score based. And so
Yeah.
there's this drive to, okay, if I can cross that line, I make it to the next level.
Yeah.
And what sometimes is hard for and not just Indian students, every student, American students, Chinese students, whatever, to understand that in highly selective admissions, you're crafting a class. So there's no line that you have to get above, right? It's as the head of admissions, you're looking at the pool and saying, okay, what is it that I want to craft? So I might take somebody with lower scores, but who is deeply interesting in this way, and I think that they bring something to the class. But I might take this person with, outstanding scores because they're going to bring some intellectual horsepower to the class. And so it's building this class. And when you think about 1,200 seats on 50,000 applications, right? There's you could fill the class with perfect SAT, perfect ACT, and perfect GPA. But then it'd be a very boring monochromatic class, right? And so you really want to what the message that I have for Indian students, because we're talking to Indian students, is you're not going to win most times by being the best. You're going to win by being unique. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I have sometimes with the Indian students because the academic system is so intense and so rigorous that it takes up an enormous part of their time.
Yes.
And then the question is, okay, how do I distinguish myself outside of that? And we have this insidious passion project that's kind of pervaded the concept of admissions, which admissions officers hate. They tell you they hate it, they tell you don't do it, but it doesn't. And a lot of this, quite frankly, is driven by parents. And I'm a parent, so I get this, right? I have a high school junior, I have an eighth grader who just went through the boarding school admissions process. And parents hear things from other parents and it's peer pressure, right? And I understand that, but things like passion projects, people see right through that. And what you see then is you see a lot of, because these communities are so tightly knit in India, for example, the top 2% or 1% that you're working with, they're so tightly knit that these rumors kind of gain traction and credibility. And so everybody is paying for research and paying for a passion project and paying for a volunteer project. And it's like, okay, admissions officers are usually very highly trained, highly educated people. They see what you're doing. And so then these students get admitted not because of these things, but despite them. So admissions officers are like, you know what? They're really interesting. We see through that passion project, but they have other things that we think are really neat, great recommendations. We're going to take them. But then that becomes a validation for the mythology, if that makes sense. And everybody's like, well,
Yes.
Mansi got in and she did this, so we have to do that. And so what I advocate to my Indian students, same thing I advocate to all of my students: have courage. Have courage to take the road less traveled. Have courage to do something that is not conventional, and you will stand out far more than the tens of thousands of other students with a similar profile who are grinding out, trying to do the same thing better.
Tell me a profile that really stood out for you for someone who didn't take the road less traveled, or someone who
Hmm.
did take the road less traveled.
Um, I mean, whenever I think about my Indian students, um, there's one in particular who stands out, who's an MBA candidate, but I think that the lesson here is applicable at all levels. And I got a note from a professor saying, "Hey, listen, I know you're in Mumbai. Can you do me a favor? Take 10 minutes, have a coffee with this young man. He's very unique. He seems smart. He's blind. But can you just meet him for coffee? It's a friend of my wife's, and it would mean a lot to me." And say, "Of course, I love doing this." So I sit down with this young man for coffee, and he blew me away. He was so smart. He had a whole story, especially you can imagine India 20 years ago, you know, accommodations, disability accommodations, not really at a point that they probably should have been. And so he told this very interesting story, not from a like self-pitying standpoint, but like, okay, here's what I had to overcome. Here's how I did it. Here's a person that took a chance on me, and talked about how he wanted to study at Wharton because there was a learning team modality, and he knew he needed that because even though he had all this software to like read the books
Yeah,
and do the work, he's like, I need a supportive team. So I went back to the school and I said, listen, I need faculty committee approval for this because it's going to be a different thing. And they all looked at his academics and they were like, yeah, I mean, he's super smart, like, great recommendations, let's try it. And he came, he was an absolute star, and he has been advocating for, he went on to be a rock star trader in London. He's killing it. And has gone on to be an advocate for those with disabilities, with blindness. He's raised a lot of money for that. Just a really thoughtful, intense, amazing person. And so stories like that where they're creating their own path and doing their own thing is in his case he was kind of driven to do that. I think resonated really well. And with Indian students you have kind of also two large buckets, right? You have the overseas boarding school bucket, and you have the kind of domestic staying in India bucket. So with the
yeah,
boarding school ones, the students that I find that are successful are the ones who aggressively try new things, who get to boarding school and they're like, you know what? I'm not going to do what everybody else is doing. I'm not going to do the same things that all my friends are doing. I'm going to try some new things. And they're getting involved either outside of the boarding school or they're trying new sports. I've had students go, and one young lady in particular, tiny, or probably 100 pounds soaking wet, decide she was going to row crew because there wasn't something that was available. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to challenge myself and try that. Ended up on the girls' varsity boat, ended up being captain just because everybody was like, we thought you were going to be the coxswain, but you ended up being one of the rowers. Never seen anybody work so hard. And it's those kinds of things where they stand out and now they have an interesting story to tell, right?
right.
The my Indian student, for example, who in India, you get a lot of family influence, right?
Yeah,
And so it's very hard sometimes to discern what is real and what is not. And so the ones who are able to either leverage that really and get real third party outside recommendations saying, yes, this young person, yes, there was an introduction, but they came, they worked, they earned the respect of the managers, the faculty, whatever it is. They really dug in. Here are concrete examples. Those students stand out significantly because the recommendations really do matter. And the only way you can earn those recommendations is, quite frankly, by earning them. And I know it sounds weird, but when you've read thousands or tens of thousands of recommendations, you know very quickly the ones that matter and the ones that are written by the student or written by the parent and given to the important official to sign.
right. It's interesting that you say that, and you said that earlier on that grades matter,
Mhm.
but how you package the whole thing and your uniqueness or your unique thumbprint matters the most.
Right.
For parenting tips, celebrity interviews, recipes, conversations with experts, DIYs, and lots more. Subscribe to Kids Talk Press now.